Okay, good morning, everyone. Happy Monday, and this is the last meeting before Christmas as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you all just to confirm that you're here. So if I could just do a quick roll call. So Pauline Batstone.
Here.
Tony Alford.
Present.
Pete Barrow.
I'm here.
Tony Coombs. Okay, nothing from Tony. Beryl Lazard. Ryan Holloway. I know I have apologies for Ryan. Stella Jones.
Yes, I'm here.
Rebecca Knox.
Yes, I'm here.
I knew it there we go. And Daryl. I know Daryl's here as well.
Confirmed.
Okay, so a slight change around, as I've just mentioned. If we could just do video on for the committee members only, and microphones on for committees only. And again, if it becomes too difficult for the bandwidth, then we'll just switch back. Helen, may I have apologies, please?
We have one apology from Councillor Ryan Holloway.
Fabulous. And members, could you declare any interests that you may wish to make? No. Fabulous. Okay, and Helen, do we have any questions from the public?
No public participation, but you need to do the minutes first, please, Chairman.
So I do, thank you. At least someone's on it. May I have any comments on the minutes of the last meeting?
Yes, can I raise one, please?
You may, Tony.
Minute number 10, which refers to me as someone who owns a property that they rent. That isn't in fact true, so I suspect it's another name that is needed there.
I believe that may be referring to the Vice Chairman. I think that's Pauline.
Could have been. I own a property and I declared an interest.
I will make that amendment, Chairman.
Fabulous. I suppose that's wishful thinking, isn't it, Tony, that you have a property that you rent out? You've just gained another property.
Well, it's just the thing. You'd like to know about it.
Okay. Can I have a proposer, please, for the minutes of the last meeting and a seconder?
So proposed, Chairman.
Fabulous. And seconder, please.
Yep, sure.
Tony, thank you. Amazing. Okay, we'll move on. Sorry, declarations of interest. I assume there are none. Public participation. Helen, are there any questions from the public?
We have no questions or statements.
Fabulous, thank you. Which brings us to agenda item 4, which is the current and future changes to the financial assessment and care contributions policy. Quite sounds dry, doesn't it? Jill Vickers to present with Nikki Fowler to answer any detailed questions. Can we just give Jill a chance and Nikki to go through the paper, and then we'll give them the questions then and the policy questions. Fab, over to you two.
Thank you, Chair. So what I was intending to do was really just talk to you about a bit about the background to the update on the financial assessment and contributions policy, why we're doing that. So the current financial assessment and care contributions policy has remained unchanged since the Care Act came out in 2014. It needs to be comprehensive to reduce variation in the way that people are assessed and to be clear about the cost of care. It's also really important because it's been backed up by recent decisions from the local government and social care ombudsman, where we've been found to be at fault really through failure to clarify how a financial assessment decision is made. So it's very important that we're as clear as we can be. The requested amendments to the policy won't change the way that we collect contributions towards care, but what they will do is provide clarification for people on how certain financial situations are treated, and they will sit within nationally set guidance, e.g. the capital limits for people, whereby once their capital drops below a certain limit is not affected. This is still nationally dictated. There will be certain situations where the Care Act guidance isn't clear about specific situations, so we have to put our own council interpretation on that. And the committee is going to be asked to agree the proposed amendments to the policy. Nikki has very kindly given me some examples of where clarification is required on the current policy, but it may be more sensible to hand over to Nikki to do that if she's comfortable.
I am. Good morning.
Thanks, Nikki.
Okay, so the changes that we're looking to make are actually recorded in the policy, the document that's set out, the report for councillors. But for example, there are situations where we might look to assess couples, or to be clear about the kind of income that couples have, because we also look to maximise their own income, so the income of the spouse as well as the person who's receiving care. So asking for a partner's details of capital and income is something that will be advantageous to them, rather than asking somebody to pay more as a result of providing that information. We clarify that we're now doing financial assessments for prisoners. So where people are in prison, they're in a custodial setting. We now have a commitment, especially in the Verne, to provide care to people, and we need to be able to financially assess those people. We clarify how we will support people who do not have capacity and cannot access their assets until someone is formally appointed to act for them. We provide clarification on the process and recovering monies paid out. So at a point where somebody is appointed to act for somebody who doesn't got capacity, we clarify that. Apologies, I've jumped around a little bit there. We confirm the decisions, how we make decisions on deprivation of assets. So the review process for appealing decisions around people giving away assets with the intention of reducing care costs. And these are all very much areas where we are challenged, and people do go to the LGSCO and challenge the decisions that we're making. We do financial assessments for third parties, so where people are paying a contribution towards the cost of a relative's care. The Care Act states that we have to do financial assessments on those third parties to ensure that it is sustainable for them to pay a third party that they're agreeing to. And we also cover the area of non-residential charges, so minimum income guarantees, which are an area that is not fully understood, especially by members of the public. So the minimum income guarantee, which is set out by central government, and entitlement to welfare benefits, so the request that people are expected to maximise their income in order to get the minimal amount of assistance that they require from the local authority. We also, one issue that actually went to the LGSCO, and this was one of the issues that we had, was that where people are expected to inform the local authority of changes in their income in order to ensure that their financial assessment is correct. Now, we have quite a lot of situations where people don't tell us about changes in their income. And what we have to do then is consider whether we will backdate financial assessments to the point where they receive that income. Now, that can cause difficulty for some people, but it's actually not fair on those people who do what they're supposed to do and do tell us of changes in their income and then have their charges increased as a result. It is not fair for those people that don't tell us to not have those charges backdated, and obviously we need to be maximising income for the authority as well where necessary. That's kind of the main areas. Are there any questions about any of that?
Nicola, thank you, and thank you, Jill. I think what I'll just do is I'll just take this moment just to remind members that we're not here to debate the cost of care, and that was decided by Dorset County Council back in 2015 and 2017. So go for it, Daryl.
Yeah, I've got one, thank you, Chairman. It's on 9.4 of the amendments table on page 17.
Yep.
And it talks about property ownership. Then it goes on to clarifies that the value of properties which are not the individual's own home will be treated as a capital asset in the financial assessment. I don't quite understand how you can do that, because to my mind, rented property is a liability more than an asset. So how does that work?
So that clarifies the position for disregarding the value of your own property. So where you own a property that you live in, where you have non-residential care services, that property will not be taken into account in a financial assessment. Or if you are in a residential care home, you can have a deferred payment agreement on that property. Now, a property that you own that you do not live in is counted as a capital asset.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so its monetary value essentially means that your asset, the asset is considered as part of your capital, rather than being an asset that you live in and that you cannot sell or would not want to sell because it is your home.
I would just wonder then if that text needs a little addition to say that you have your own home, and I don't know.
Yep.
When you read that as it is, it doesn't say what you've just said.
Okay.
Thank you.
Noted.
Thank you, Daryl. Rebecca Knox, Councillor Knox.
Yes, I'm just interested in the discretionary element of deciding whether the authority pays for somebody's care or not. So under the Care Act, there is an element there, isn't there? Whether they've actually declared their financial assets or their situation. And I just wondered, at what level does that decision go to? Is it director level? And how many cases is it approximately per year where we have that discretion to decide whether we pay or charge or not charge?
Under our current policy, we don't exercise discretion, so it would be for anybody whose assets are deemed to be over the limit for funding of £23,250. We don't really exercise discretion ever. The only thing that we do is potentially exercise. So we have, for instance, this year, we would not normally offer to fund somebody's care where they own a second property. So the situation that I've just gone through, if you own a second property, you could go and raise money against it, and we would not fund your care. During this year, where we have had people who own second properties, and they have not been able to sell their property because of COVID-19. So the housing market dropped off in March. We have made discretionary decisions to fund people's care in the interim where we wouldn't normally do so, because their assets are tied up in a property that is not immediately realisable. But generally, we don't make discretionary decisions other than on properties. I can't think of any specific decisions where we have taken somebody who is effectively considered to be able to meet the full cost of their care and met the cost of that care.
Okay, may I just follow up on just one point, Chairman? As it says in the Care Act, we could. If that decision were to be made, at what level would it go to? I'm thinking if there aren't any cases, and there haven't been any cases, then actually it would go to the director, because it sounds like it would be very unusual. But could you just clarify that, please? Thank you.
I can clarify that, Councillor Knox. Yes, it would indeed go to the director if it was discretionary, because the main principle we have in this policy is equity and fairness. So we would have to have a really good reason as to why we would take that discretionary route.
Okay, that's very good. Thank you very much.
Fabulous. I'm just going to ask a quick question now. So just as a point of clarity, 2.3. It refers to civil partners, but not married people. is there a difference in terms of how the council recognises them?
No, married partners have always been recognised as married partners, and this would effectively be counting. You never, in the past, civil partners were not counted in that, but civil partners are now counted as the same as married partners.
So, so just clarity again. So if we count as married couples as individual people.
Yes. So the Care Act says that we should, we cannot assess people as couples. So what we have to do, the problem that causes for us is that people receive benefits as couples, so they are assessed by the Department for Work and Pensions as a couple. So what we have to do is then have a policy effectively for splitting joint assets, so jointly paid benefits, and how we do that. So what we effectively do is we give 50% to one partner and 50% to the other partner.
Fab, thank you, that's useful. I think my one concern is that we haven't actually mentioned married people. We haven't mentioned marriage, only civil partnerships. I know that's me being pernickety.
Yep, no, fair enough, fair comment. I will have a look at that.
It's very, very minor, I know, very minor.
Yeah.
I think if I could come in, if I may, Chair, this kind of highlights the fact that we really do need a policy that's written in plain English that people fully understand, because it is a very complex area, so it's very easy for people not to understand what we're doing or why we're doing it. So that's part of the reason for rewriting.
Yeah, makes absolute sense. Pete Barrow, Councillor Barrow.
Can I just come in on that? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
I'm having connection problems. It's the question about plain English. I mean, I fully support that. So the question is, this document, is it intended to be read and understood by members of the public, or is it for internal consumption? And if it is intended for the members of the public, could we clarify some of the language even further?
So this document is actually written for members, but we would always welcome, where we write policy documents for the public, welcome anybody giving us comments about things that are not clear, because it's very easy for us in adult social care to think it's clear because we know and understand it. So very happy to run things past you, so you could comment and say, no, actually that's not clear. That would be very helpful.
A simple point would be a word a minute ago was used, realisable.
Yes.
Which to a lot of people would probably not be clear, and that was just one word. I would fully support things being written for a much wider audience and to be written as plainly as possible, even if that makes us, should we say, sound a bit less professional.
If I could just clarify there, so the policy is made available to people on the website, and there are circumstances where members of the public do ask for copies of our policy, to be clear on how we do treat aspects of financial assessments. It is a very complex area.
I do understand that.
I agree. Councillor Knox. Rebecca, go for it.
Sure, thank you. I imagine, just following up on that, I imagine this is a bit like a sort of, if you put it in terms of, this is the Act, and then there will be plain English guidance notes to ensure that people who are applying are taken through it in a plain English way. I would imagine that. I hope that would happen.
We have a set of leaflets that are sent out to people when they're having financial assessments, which is hopefully a much clearer information giving document on how we do financial assessments. But yes, this is very much the nitty gritty of how we do things.
And just on what I was going to ask, you referred just in your introduction to change your financial circumstance for people. And the difficulty in, well, we aren't proactive necessarily in going out to see if people's financial circumstances have changed, and sometimes people aren't aware that they need to alert us. Where there might be a case where somebody has won the lottery, surely there would be a policy or a process in here to retrospectively ensure that we regain some of the amount that might have been paid for their care? I mean, that's a real extreme. Not many people win the lottery, but I'm just trying to sort of make sure that there is something there.
Yep.
That means that we can correct any abuse of the system.
Yeah, so it has happened. Certainly in my time, we've had one situation where that has happened. So this is what we're trying to put into the policy. So we have this area, particularly around backdated benefits, so where people don't tell us about changes in benefits, but also their capital. So that would pick up on the very circumstance that you mention. And every letter that we send to people with a financial assessment says it is your duty to tell us of any changes. Interestingly, we have since April, so since April 2019, we've had the ability to access the Department for Work and Pensions database. But obviously we can't keep up with changes as they happen because the DWP have no idea who is receiving care and who isn't. So every year when we go through our uprating process and change people's contributions towards their care in line with their entitlement to income and their increased benefits, we have a look at certain situations where we think that people might have been entitled to something more, and we often pick up in our April processes changes in people's benefits. For instance, this year we have picked up 150 people who had not told us about changes in their benefits. Now, what we do in April is we then change their income so that their contribution is correct. And then over the course of the next few months, we have to write to every one of those individuals, work out what they have not paid as a result, and make contact with them to address the issue of a backdated sum of money that they might owe us, whether that just be a change or an increase or even a decrease in their income, or a change in their capital that means that we look to recover all the money that we've paid out on their behalf. So, and actually some of the changes now are very much geared towards that and being clear that it is people's responsibility to tell us when their income or their capital changes, and that if they don't, we will look to recover that money at such point as we find out about it. That is one circumstance that has actually been through the LGSCO, and we were able to clarify, to give them copies of letters that were sent to individuals that said you need to tell us about any changes, and they found in our favour that there was no reason why we couldn't look to backdate those charges.
That's assuring. Thank you very much.
Just on that point, Nicola, I mean, my concern is that we're too reliant on people that are vulnerable to be able to tell us about changes in their circumstances, and that for me is a real concern. I mean, we're talking about some of these people might be quite elderly, and they may have other conditions which affect their memory. I think we need to be a bit more proactive in terms of how we gather the data. I think the worst case scenario is that we have to act to on the backdated payments, and I think that's completely wrong. Now, we as a council have the ability to we pay out benefits, certain benefits as a council, things like housing benefits, and we do things like our council tax support. So the information is readily available to us. So why don't we act then, rather than have that level of communication between the two departments, rather than 6 months down the road when we've done an audit?
I would say that the same reasoning applies there, in that a lot of people receive housing benefit and council tax support, but they don't always receive care services. So for the and there's a lot of data protection issues between information that's provided by the Department for Work and Pensions and information that we're holding, and it is something that we've tried very hard to address. We are working much more closely with revenues and benefits to get information from them, but the DWP are very, very data protection conscious, and there are certain things that we have to try and get around in order to do that. With regard to the capacity issues and people being able to provide information themselves, I absolutely agree with you, and certainly what the process, I mean, just to give you some idea, the 250 cases that we have picked up where we have not been notified of changes is a potential recovery of backdated money of £500,000 this year. So, but what that has also shown us is that there are people who don't have capacity and who we know don't have capacity. And as you say, how can we then expect them to be telling us about income if they don't have capacity? We are trying to work with our locality teams and with our legal teams to identify how we best approach those areas where people, because if they can't tell us about changes in their income, they will also have difficulty in running their own finances on a day-to-day basis. And it's how we deal with that, and we are working to address those issues as well going forward.
If I can just come in there, Chair, and say that's where we look at water protection for people, but it is a time-consuming process. It's not something that is quick. So whenever anyone lacks capacity, that's the first thing we look to is water protection.
And there are an awful lot of people out there who have people manage their money on an informal basis. And potentially, if we said we would only deal with people who are acting for somebody on a formal basis, potentially 50% of the financial assessments that we do, we would not be able to complete. So there's a bit of a weighing up there of what we do, and we are constantly taking legal advice as to the best way to deal with that. But certainly this process this year of recovery of backdated benefits has shown that that's an issue that we need to be considering going forward.
Yeah, thank you, Nicola. That was a really good answer, but I think my challenge is still there. I think that we as a council generate a lot of information, especially from our Rebs and Bens team, which is our data, and we have ownership of it, and I think we could use that. So it'd be interesting to see if we get something pulled out of this in terms of better data sharing, so we can resolve this issue. Who have I got next? I've got Daryl Turner, Councillor Turner.
Andrew, thank you. Yeah, I was coming on the same lines as the question you've just asked the second time. I believe we are meant to be a digital council. I think obviously there is a process that they go through in April. Now I can imagine that's time consuming, heavy on capacity, but there must be a digital solution to that as often as we want it. And that's something I would look for in the future, is getting that digital solution. I think that we are capable. We are more than capable. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Cheers, Daryl. Stella Jones, Councillor Jones.
Yeah, my point's more or less been covered. I was going to talk about a power of attorney and whether we could persuade people to get power of attorney earlier on, perhaps.
Do you know what, Stella? That's quite an interesting point. Perhaps we should, as a council, be pushing for people to ensure their wills are updated, etc. And that they've got the power of attorney. Jill, do you want to comment on that, on Stella's point? She's busy typing. Or Nicola?
Maybe I could comment. Yeah, there.
Yeah,
so certainly we have spent this year putting together a new set of leaflets for the public about certainly in this very area. So there is a leaflet that goes out to service users at the start of their journey with us, that talks about money management and does suggest to people that powers of attorney are always a good idea. Yes, we have tried again to make sure that message is out there as much as possible.
Thank you.
Fabulous. Tony Alford.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I have a number of general points to make, which I will do so, and also quite a number of detailed points on the text in the policy. Now, it may well be, for the purpose of our meeting this morning, it's sort of better and more efficient if I perhaps put those detailed questions in a note and send them through to our officers. But I'm happy to deal with them in the meeting, depending on your decision.
Do you know what, Tony? I'm happy for you to take them here and now, purely because I think Nicola, what was fantastic is Nicola was quite open, and she said, these are the areas that we need because we've been legally challenged on. And if some of those are related to clarity, then I think that's really important. So I know that we're a policy committee, but part of this is ensuring that we do have that clarity, so we can meet that. So if there's areas of fluff, Tony, yeah, by all means.
Okay, fine. Well, I'll start with some general points first, because the whole topic reads like we have a policy and this is how we are amending it. And I come into this on the way of thinking which says this is the first policy of Dorset Council. So this is a Dorset Council policy, and I'm interested in whether it stands up for itself. And the policy seems to betray its heritage, because you only have to look at the back page and you see a date of 2015 there. And also somewhere, and I can't remember exactly where it is now, the policy invites us to take an interest in something exciting, a new change in April 2015. So I have a sense that the style could be better if it's clear this is the first Dorset Council policy on this topic. So it's just a general comment. I'm also interested in the risk rating, and the risk rating is low. And I can understand it being low for introducing a charging policy. But I certainly have a sense from the documentation and the things that have been said this morning, with cases that get put to the local governments and social care ombudsman, that overall this is an area of activity that does carry quite a bit of risk. So there may well be occasions when I could understand a bit more about how the service works and how risk is managed. And I'm interested in where in the organisation of Dorset Council this activity actually happens. And I'll give you an example. I've seen references in the text to a financial support manager. I've seen a reference to a strategic finance service. I've seen a reference to something called SUFA. I've seen a reference to financial assessment team manager, and I don't have a sense of understanding how the service works, where it sits in the organisation of Dorset Council. So perhaps you could give me an answer on that one.
I can, yep. So the financial assessment team historically were part of Adult and Community Services. A couple of years ago, we moved into strategic finance. So we talk about strategic finance is the service. We are part of Aidan Dunn's team, I am the financial assessment team manager, and my manager Chris Watkins is the financial support manager. The service users financial affairs team, so the SUFA team, are a team that sit within adult services, and they are the team that manage people's money for them. So where you do not have somebody who can manage their own money and there aren't any family members to do it, they are the service users financial affairs team. So they are part of Adults and Housing. The financial assessment team itself is part of corporate finance.
Okay. Well, thanks for the answer. Whether it's the best way of organising ourselves, I haven't really got the answer yet, but maybe on another day I will think about that. Revs and Bens have been mentioned, and it did occur to me that we do need a good connection with Revs and Bens, but that has already been said by others, so I would support what they say. I did wonder as well whether Citizens Advice Bureau get involved in these charging issues and represent customers, as it were, in their dealings on the subject.
They do, and solicitors also get involved as well. So we will always say to people that they are entitled to take independent legal and financial advice in whatever way they would like to.
Have we consulted with Citizens Advice Bureau about this?
No.
Is there a benefit? Well, on the face of it, to me, it seems a benefit from doing so, but have you thought about it?
If I could come in, Councillor, on that point, because it's an internal council policy, we would expect members to agree the policy or the change in policy first. Very happy to share it with CAB. I'm sure they would welcome anything that makes things clearer for individuals who would be subject to the financial assessment, but we're more than happy to share that and get their comments, because they may be good at commenting on our use of plain English, for example.
Well, I would agree on that point. OK, let's move on.
You're still going, Tony?
Yeah, I will do. I'm just sort of, I've got notes and whatever. If anyone else wants to speak while I'm looking things up,
well,
please carry on.
This is the opportune moment Director Vivian Broadhurst has just mentioned, built on Stella Jones's point about how it's a really positive message for all of us to make plans for our future health and finances. Important to do this planning early before we have any needs. It's a good message to promote, and I suppose that builds in with Tony, with your point with the CAB. And I think it's about really, it will save the council a lot of fuss and hassle and money if residents did have their finances and their legalities up to date, but also that, from my point of view, that understanding as well. And I think that where I encounter residents is there's a real confusion between NHS sort of health, and that they don't perhaps understand that care is provided by the council and there's a cost associated with it. And for people just thinking that care is this sort of generic thing that you just fall into, and actually it's really not, and that expectation and that shock that actually it costs the council. I'll tell you what, there we go, Jill. How much does it cost to keep say someone in a care home per annum? I'll test you. Jill, you're on mute, sorry.
Sorry, I'm afraid it is how long is a piece of string, because it can be up to £1 million a year, but that wouldn't be the norm. But it is very expensive, and you're right. What we need to do is get a message across to people that helping them to manage their money better helps not just them but also the council, so that we can make our money go further.
Okay, so can we draw that out and get some sort of form of policy on it, so we can, perhaps comms messages, etc. Can we get that somewhere into the document moving forwards about how we're going to encourage residents to do that?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Tony, are you ready?
Yes, I'm on 3.2, page 27, and it's about the upper and lower limits, which I understand. Now, I believe the upper and lower limits are mentioned each year in the annual circular. So we have talked about the MIG having an automatic adjustment system when the numbers change per the annual circular. So would it be sensible to apply the same sort of approach to these two numbers referred to here?
Yes, it would. I thought the document did do that. I will check that, but yes, absolutely it would.
Okay, and then 4.2 on the same page, where we have processes for dealing with things. We don't talk about doing things online.
No, we don't have the ability to complete financial assessments online at the moment.
If I could just come in there for a second, we are working on that as part of our transformation programme, but it does mean a complete change to our Mosaic client record information system, but we will be working on that over the next few months, because it's important that we can encourage as many people who can to use that digital approach.
Well, I would agree with that. I was just about to ask you about where does transformation sit with all this?
I would just say that we do send paperwork to people online, and people do submit information online that we then put into the system. But yes, at the moment there isn't an opportunity to actually enter information into an online financial assessment from the public, no.
Right, okay. I was on 4.8 and elsewhere where there is the notional income on savings, and I understand the rule, but there's a notional income there which is really out of line with what could be achieved in reality.
Do you mean with regard to interest?
With regard to notional income, I think it is.
Yeah, so that is not designed to reflect the amount of money that you will get from your savings. It is designed to continue to reduce your capital assets from the upper capital limit to the lower capital limit, albeit at a much slower pace than if you were meeting the full cost of your care services.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm on 5.3, page 29, and it talks about the light touch approach to financial assessment. And I didn't see anything in the policy about people who are just simply uncooperative.
I will check that. There is certainly a process, so people are expected to, people are assumed to be able to meet the full cost of their care. I think that says that at the beginning, that people are assumed to be able to meet the full cost of their care, and if they choose not to show us or to apply for financial assistance and evidence that they are unable to meet the full cost of their care, then they will be charged. If they choose not to provide that information, they will be charged the full cost of their care.
That's absolutely right, Nicola. Yes, yeah. If they refuse to give us the information, we have to treat them as if they are able to pay the full cost.
And that happens, does it?
Yes, it does. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, page 30. There are references to 2 policies on that page. I just wondered if you would want to give links to them.
Yes, that would be a good idea.
Tony, you are like an eagle when it comes to this.
Well, I have to be quite frank and say that on the there's a section on the end of this policy that I'm going to. It's the income and capital disregards, which I am going to have to read again before I can.
I think you're right.
Really intelligently comment on them.
I'm more than happy to take any questions via email if there are further questions afterwards.
I think that's it.
Okay.
Those policies can be looked at with that. Rebecca, you've got a question. Councillor Knox.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just to follow up on what you said earlier, actually, Chairman, which was about reaching out to people and alerting them to the fact that they're going to be paying for their care potentially. Towards the end of one local government organisation and moving into another, one of the key areas, and I don't know if it's actually been brought forward, but it should have been, is that it's not at that time of life when you're about to need care that you need to be told. It's actually when you're in your earlier years, and it's those people who are going to have to advise potentially their parents or the people that they care for who do need the care how to do this. And I'm not sure whether there should be a comms strategy now in place to reach out to the 30, 40, 50-year-old people who are actually got the issue of those who are older than them, but also their own issue. We often talked about that your home for life. So when people are making decisions about the house that they're going to be living in and retiring in, or you make it as the one that you can adapt for any future needs to stay living as independently as possible. It sort of fits into that area. So maybe it's not policy, but it actually should be. It should be policy. Actually, it should be our policy to be engaging with those generations of people. Thinking ahead.
Absolutely agree with that, and that is part of our developing accommodation policy and strategy, really, that we do make sure that people can have homes for life, and you're quite right, that requires at times quite major adaptations, and so it is part of our developing strategy.
I've got Tony Alford that's going to come back on that on a point.
Well, I've got more points if you're ready for more points. Yes, I'm on page 31, and it's 7.3 on that page, where it says that all the billing, including top-ups that people have, is made by Dorset Council. And I just wonder why we have that policy. I just wonder if we're doing more cash handling than we need to do with the risk of potential bad debts.
We do it because the Care Act says that it is our responsibility. So the charging for third parties, is our responsibility.
Okay, fine, I understand that. I'm on capital now, page 37, I think. No, page 38, 16.3, 16.4 perhaps. And you talk about assets being shared equally, effectively, amongst couples. What about land?
That would depend on who they were owned by. So if the ownership was a joint ownership, then it would be 50% of the asset. If it was in a sole name, it would be the full amount of the asset. Yes,
I've forgotten all the terminology, but you can have land ownership, which is not necessarily 50-50. And so if the legal agreements have been set up in such a way where the ownership of land and buildings is other than 50-50, will that be respected?
Yes, so we would ask people to evidence their assets. So if that includes a 30-70% ownership of an asset, then yes, we would absolutely respect that.
Okay, fine, thank you.
All right, I'm just going to ask one final question, and then we'll wrap this up. I'm just my one area where I believe it still is a little bit fluffy, Nikki, is around the deprivation of assets.
Yep.
So hold on, I think 6, and in particular, sort of 6.1. Do we have a policy on this? And
yes, we do.
Because it should really be going out there. I think the one thing is that, you know, if we put it out there to the public with timelines, I mean, how does it work? Have people got to give gifts to their family, you know, 2 years before receiving care? It's all a little bit.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm happy. I'm content if there is a policy on it. Fabulous.
Yep. There is, but just to give a little bit of background, so we can go back as far as we need to. But what we have to do, and it's slightly different than the financial assessment policy, because the financial assessment says that the onus is on the person to prove that they have insufficient assets. With deprivation of assets, the onus is on us to prove that the need for care could be foreseen at the time the gift was made. So the examples that I usually give are that if somebody was diagnosed with a degenerative illness, such as MS, 20 years ago, and at that point they give away a large amount of money and then start to have care services, then they may well be treated as having deprived themselves of assets, because at the time the gift was made, the potential need for care in the future could be foreseen. You could also have somebody who is fit and well, hasn't seen a doctor for many years. They give away all their assets and a month later they have a stroke and end up needing care. And, you know, that could be a month ago. But the difference is that at the time they gave away money, they could not have foreseen the need for care. So actually, we can go back as far as we need to. We spend a lot of time looking at the information that we have on individuals. And it does very much depend on whether they were known to social services either here or in another county. So we will also go to other counties if there has been a care need or if somebody has moved. But it is all about creating a picture which includes their entitlement to benefits, what benefits they've been receiving, whether they've been receiving disability benefits, and putting together a picture of their circumstances at that time, and whether we can effectively say that given those circumstances, you could foresee the need for future care services.
Amazing. Nicola and Jill, thank you so much. That was really useful and actually quite interesting. I'm going to go to the recommendation now, and the recommendation is that we agree, and that also I suppose also that the points that we've raised have gone up to, will go up to Laura and the cabinet member to be acted upon. So can I propose that the updated policy set out in Appendix A is agreed. This incorporates the changes identified with this report under section 2.2, and agreement is sought for the executive director and the portfolio holder for adult social care and health to have delegated authority to sign off future minor amendments and clarification of decision-making processes with the policy.
So moved, Chairman.
That, please.
So moved.
Pauline, yeah, and a seconder.
I'll second that, Andrew.
Tony. Cheers, thank you. Or Daryl, yeah, fab. And I'm going to assume there's no dissenters there. Fabulous. Okay, all right. I like having very short agendas because it means we can do a bit more of a deep dive. And this item here is actually something that I really want to give a good go on. So agenda item 5, which is the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Draft Strategy and Action Plan. I've got Susan Ward-Rice and Becky Forrester. Again, if Becky, if you'd like to introduce the item, and then we'll have questions and bring in policies after that. Rebecca.
Thank you, Chairman.
Sorry, is it Rebecca or Becky? I've been calling you Rebecca. It sounds very formal, doesn't it?
Either is fine, Becky normally, but either is fine. Thank you.
We're doing the diversity and inclusion strategy. I suppose we should really be like, well, what would you like to be called?
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Peter Wharf has been very involved in this as the portfolio holder for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. He is just wrapping up another meeting and is then hoping to come and join us and introduce the item if that's possible. I think he's going to be literally 2 minutes.
Well, he's not here, so we're going to have to crack on.
Okay.
Is that all right? Is that all right, Becky? And he can do his chip in when after you, but I'm not gonna put the meeting on hold for 2 minutes because of his tardiness. What's more important?
Okay, fine, thank you. In that case, yeah, I'll make a start. So thank you very much for making time for this on your agenda today. It's very much a working draft, and we are very keen, as you said, Chairman, to have a really good discussion about it today. It's not going to the Cabinet for agreement until the new year, so we have still got time to make additions and amendments, and in fact we are still having conversations with other partners about it. So all contributions very welcome. As it says in the report, our starting point essentially with the work was a concern that while there were certainly pockets of very positive work towards equality, diversity and inclusion going on across the council, it wasn't part of a clear and coherent vision or plan, that those bits of activity had been happening in quite sort of disparate ways and across different services, and not necessarily through the lens of equality and diversity. So that was kind of our starting kind of premise in a sense. And our concern obviously was given a sense of urgency following the murder of George Floyd in America and the Black Lives Matter movement, and also by the spread of COVID, which, as we know, doesn't affect all population groups equally, but presents greater risks to, depending on sex, socio-economic group, geographical area, and race and ethnicity. So that was all. They were all adding kind of drivers and a sense of urgency to what we wanted to do. It was also given a greater sense of urgency following the assessment that we undertook with Public Health Dorset back in May, which was looking at the impact of COVID-19 on the most vulnerable communities in Dorset. And members hopefully will remember being involved in some roundtable discussions that contributed to that assessment. And that went to the Cabinet back in June. And if there are elements of the documents that you're looking at today that sound familiar, it's because they reflect many of the themes, or hopefully they reflect many of the themes and actions that members help to identify at that point and as a result of those discussions. So they include things like the crucial roles played by voluntary and community organisations, problems of accessibility and digital exclusion and things like that. So it's very deliberate attempt to build on the work that was started back in May.
Chairman, can I come in?
I was going to say there's a natural break there, and Peter Wolf, the portfolio holder, has entered the room. So Peter, take it away.
Thank you. Can I thank Becky, who is reading from a pre-prepared note that was produced between us, and she is saying what I would have said, which is great, and I thank Becky and Susan for the work they've done on this. Obviously, as the portfolio holder, I take complete and full responsibility for this. And because I couldn't hear at the beginning, I just wanted to say that even if this has been said already, we have a concern that whilst there are pockets of work to promote EDI across the council, it wasn't part of a clear and coherent vision or plan. And this is part of the reason for addressing this. Becky will have said a number of other things, to which I say thank you very much. And if I can just continue, we talked about the roundtable discussions that members had with Public Health Dorset. One councillor said, and here I quote, "There's been a real resurgence in community spirit. We need to look for a way to continue that. I hope that as councillors we can encourage our residents to keep that spirit. People seem to have started liking each other again." End of quote. And that was a really powerful statement, and this work and the way which officers have gone about it, delivering it, is a conscious attempt to keep that spirit going. As part of developing the strategy and the action plan, we undertook discussions with voluntary and community organisations, trade unions and residents. We had some pre-consultation discussions to help make sure we were asking the right questions, and spoke to many organisations throughout the consultation period. And I'd like to think we're still listening now, and we will continue to listen until we achieve the culture change we're striving to. Although this is something that I view as a constant exercise. It isn't something you can say, oh, we've got there, we can stop now. We've had some really positive and constructive feedback, and we've undoubtedly had a much stronger product as a result of this. The process of deliberation with partners has helped us to sharpen our thinking around monitoring and evaluation, and I hope it's also started to create a sense of shared ownership over what we're trying to achieve. I know it seems a little bit early for thanks, but I would like to say particular thanks to a number of organisations that have made a really significant contribution to this paper, and that includes the trade unions, the FED, the Forum for Equality and Diversity, DREC, which is Dorset Race Equality Council, and the Dorset Gypsy and Traveller Liaison Group, and they've all engaged and they've all given their support. So to close, I'm obviously interested in your thoughts on this issue. But if the chair has no objection, I'd particularly like to direct this committee to 4 things I'm looking for. First, do you think our premise, essentially that EDI needs greater coherence, was correct? Second is there anything missing from these documents? Third is, are there any additional recommendations you think the Cabinet should be considering in relation to EDI? And the fourth is a more generic thing, and sorry to get start quoting people, but Kennedy said, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. And my question is that this is not an individual responsibility. This is a culture change which involves everybody. And my question is, how are you going to help to install and embed the culture? Because it isn't something you can just say, right, portfolio holder, you go away and do it. We all have to play our part. I'm very happy to take ultimate responsibility, but I need everybody's help. And my last question is, how are you going to help? So thanks again to Becky and Susan for all the work they've done. And thank you to Becky for starting my bit off. And I leave you those questions, and I'm happy to answered any questions you have, Andrew. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Becky, and thank you, Peter. I think if I could just add something in from what Peter said about what would be useful to look at, I think we really have to start thinking about what does good look like, what sort of targets do we want to see, and I think that's really up to us to be able to give a really clear steer. I don't know if Peter you'd agree with me on that.
I would, and I'm I was giving you 4 areas I'd like you to look into. But at the end of the day, it's your decision. I really want you to contribute to this and make it work. But how you do it, where you do it, when you do it is up to you.
All right. So I've purposely given us quite a nice chunk of time on this, so you can really do a deep dive. I like the fact that it's a draft document and it's still very much open to us to make those changes. So fire away. Daryl, do you want to raise your point to the rest of the committee?
I did put something in the chat bar, Andrew. Yeah, it's just that my feeling is those 4 questions should have been posed in advance of the meeting, so we had a chance to actually do some work prior to this. Therefore, I think those questions should be looked at by the committee offline perhaps and brought back to a future meeting. I think, I'm not sure what the timings are for the next meeting, but it's fairly early in the new year. The recommendations in front of us, I see no issues with that. But I think, have we got time to look or deep dive into those 4 questions? I don't think so. Thanks.
So I think the questions there more to facilitate the conversation rather than be and help provide a bit of structure rather than they're not particularly rigid. This is a large document, I admit that, but that's why we've got. I've ensured that we've had quite a clear agenda, and we've got basically an hour to go through this. I know full well that there's quite a lot of things in there that are quite contentious. There are things that we are all passionate about, certain groups that we'd like to see represented, certain things we want to see the council achieve. There are certain things I don't agree with, and there are certain things that I do very much agree with. So I think it's really good to hear our views. But we must have. Does anyone have any comments on this moving forwards? I know it's Vivian here, but she disappeared off because I know full well that she does. There's certain things I would like to see, especially based around health outcomes. Stella Jones, Councillor Jones.
First of all, I think it's a very good policy document we've got here, but I think we need to think about how it's used in the workforce. There's been a lot of issues lately nationally about bullying. Now, if you've got an equality document, how does that make people work in a better, more equal place in the workforce? That's my first question. And secondly, do we make sure that people, organisations and outside bodies we are working with also have equality standards, that we are happy to work with them?
Becky, happy to take that question.
Can I, if that was directed at me, can I ask Susan to talk about the work we do with our colleagues?
Susan, you have to say that one.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. In terms of with our colleagues, if we're procuring services and commissioning services, we would have equality questions built into that process. And I know at the moment we're looking at sort of social value around that, and that's very much linked to sort of equality and diversity and inclusion as well. We can offer advice and support to organisations, and we certainly do that through the sort of community, voluntary and faith sector. We offer support and advice around equality and diversity issues. So yeah, I suppose we do ultimately.
And so do we ever think about even the premises that we use for meetings when we have real meetings? Do they have policies that allow use by everybody, because I know there used to be a place in Dorchester which had barred certain people.
Yeah, and I know sort of who you mean, Councillor Jones. Yeah, I think we need to get better at it though, and interestingly, Help and Kindness, which is a local community voluntary organisation, they're doing some work at the moment around mapping community assets and mapping them around them in an equality and diversity point of view. So looking at sort of in terms of physical access, but also what else that building or venue offers, and whether it's sort of accessible to all groups. And I think that will help us in the future in terms of looking at how we use sort of other buildings for sort of whether that's for council meetings or for community use as well. And that process is just very much at the start point, sort of the mapping, but yeah.
Thank you. And my first point about making sure that our workforce know what equality means when they are dealing with members of staff.
I suppose this strategy links very much into sort of our equality, diversity and inclusion policy that was adopted about this time last year, and that sort of links with a suite of other sort of HR policies around sort of grievance, dignity and work and disciplinary. So it is part of that process, and we're very keen within the strategy that it links with the people strategy as well, which is our sort of internal and our internal sort of framework about how we work and develop as employees.
Thanks.
Fabulous, thank you, Stella. Okay, all right. I'm going to go for a little bit of a deeper dive. So things that I don't particularly like about this document. So one of the things refers to COVID and the effects of COVID on our population. So it refers to older people being most affected by COVID. I think from a disease point of view, that's absolutely true. But I think the document doesn't really focus on the fact that there's many of our younger people and working age people haven't necessarily been affected by the virus, but they've been most affected by the lockdown and the ramifications to reduce the spread of the virus. And I don't think that's really reflected in the document. So I think that's one thing that I'd really like to change. And I don't know if and there you go, and Daryl's just put things like the mental health issues that have come forwards and how it's affected people financially. Becky, I don't know if you want to speak on that.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. We can certainly go back and add that in, and I recognise those as themes that came out of the equality impact assessment we did around COVID, and the actions from the COVID action plan, which pick up on some of those, will be part of the wider action plan as well. So we will be keeping our eye on that. But if there are additional specific actions that members think we can make, then very happy to add those in.
Okay, and if no other members are speaking, then I'll quite happily look at one of the things that really concerns me are things like the health issues. So we understand things like COVID and other issues. There's quite a difference in terms of health equality, especially within our different ethnic communities. So, for instance, our BAME communities are more likely to die early and have certain specific diseases. So it's very little in terms of in the policy how we're going to address health inequality.
Yeah, we can take that away. We had a really useful conversation actually recently with Public Health Dorset, who've got some really brilliant data on this that I must admit I wasn't aware of until after we drafted the policy and the action plan. So yes, I think we can definitely add that in, and I think it will also give us some really useful performance measures as well, so we can actually monitor how much of a difference we're making on that as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's an easy one to be able to target. I mean, for me, the best outcome would be that there is no difference in terms of health outcomes as a result of your ethnic background. But yeah, I think that's a nice easy one that we can get involved in.
Yeah.
Here we go. All right, Councillor Wharf.
Oh, you can call me Peter. the point you raise about health issues and BAME is absolutely right. I think we always were clear that this needs more work done on it, so we're very grateful for the steer. I would like to go back to the bullying issue that Stella talked about a minute ago, because we've done quite a lot of HR work with employees to address this, and perhaps Susan could talk about that. In terms of public health and health issues, we have to recognise that making a difference will almost certainly involve us working in partnership with Public Health Dorset and a number of other partners, and we will work with them to produce a further stage of this report. But it may be, and I just suggest this, maybe an idea to have colleagues from Public Health next time you review this, Public Health Dorset in particular. Yeah. And so if you like that idea, we'll take that one away. And if you could ask Susan to comment on the work we're doing with the workforce to address bullying, to answer Steryl's, yeah, I agree with you, Daryl, all partner organisations. To answer Stella's point, I would also be grateful. Thank you.
Yes. Susan, do you want to come in to answer Stella's point?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose it's our behaviour framework, ultimately, sort of our respect, responsibility and recognition framework that we're using. And I'm not sort of directly involved, I suppose, in HR in terms of sort of some of the finer details, but sort of that is included sort of within the sort of the people strategy. And it might be better to bring David McIntosh in on this point.
Yeah, fantastic. David, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Morning, members. I was just about to try to come in first time round on this point, and I thought had covered it off, but happy to go into a little bit more detail. Because this is a matter for all of us, isn't it, in terms of how we treat each other, whether it's members or officers. And as Susan has reminded us, we've got a people strategy, which is a positive document, which aims to help us achieve our aspiration to become an employer of choice. We know we've done some good work on that, but we've got a way to go. One of the excellent pieces of early work actually was the Behaviours Framework, which again, Susan mentioned. So these are the things about how we go about what we do and how we treat other people, and that respect behaviour is critical to that. And it is used a lot. I don't know in members' experience, but certainly from an officer point of view, people refer to Behaviours Framework a lot in a positive way and use it to appropriately challenge if anything's happening that we don't think fits within that behaviour framework. So it was good piece of work. It continues, and I think if you compare that to other things, it's more embedded, I think, as an organisation than perhaps some of the other aspects of the people strategy. So good early work. We still are, as an organisation, relatively immature, aren't we? We've not been in existence for that long, and if you take into account the impact and disruption of COVID, we were less than 12 months in being before that rightly distracted us. So I think good early work, but never to be complacent about these things. From a cultural point. So next year we're launching a leadership and culture approach. So this not only will be about how we support and develop leaders and managers, but also about how we create the right culture. And the Behaviours Framework, again, linked back to that, is an essential part of it. So it's always going to be ongoing. But I would suggest, Chairman, we've made some quite good early progress in that regard.
Yeah, fabulous. Are you happy with that response?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Fab. Okay, Councillor Barrow, Pete Barrow.
It's just to follow up on the comments made by David a minute ago about leadership programme for council staff. Would there be any intention to actually offer the same training to councillors themselves, so that we have a better understanding of how our own organisation is training its managers, and not necessarily go through the whole process, but just some sort of briefing or overview on what's actually been, what the expectations on our senior managers are?
Chair, if I may just respond to Councillor Bauer's point. We did actually, and Peter might want to comment, hope to give you a briefing on the people strategy. But to be honest, when we looked at the members' seminar programme, it was already packed. And we're hoping that sometime next year we can find a slot to do that. And to be honest, it will be more timely then because we'll have made further progress. So very happy to take that away and work with Peter to brief you at an appropriate time, say, you know, in the first half of next year.
There you go. Peter Wolf, do you want to come in as well? You put an RTS.
Yes. Yeah, it may be slightly with the first half of next year, but the early first half of next year, I certainly was planning to do that, to talk about the work on our employment and strategy of being an employer people want to work for, and we can talk to all members about the progress we're making on that. I don't want to give a date, but I would like to think it was sooner rather than later in next year, February, March, something like that. We've had rather a lot of competition for members' seminars just lately in terms of subjects. So dependent on the state of the pandemic, I would try and get it in the second month of next year or thereabouts, but it depends. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Daryl.
Yeah, and just coming back to a couple of things that both David and Peter talked about. We've talked about culture change now for as many years as I can remember, going back in various forms of councils. It's one of the hardest things to achieve. I just wondered if we're going to be looking at this as an overview committee, how are we intending to monitor culture change? Any thoughts, Peter or David?
Chairman, I'm happy to comment on that. Having led a culture change programme in 2 fairly large organisations, I agree with Daryl. It's incredibly difficult to measure. You tend to have a sense that you know when you've achieved something, but actually measuring it to say, look, it's, you know, over 7.5 on the culture change scale is very difficult. We have a pulse survey that we put around amongst employees, and it's called Pulse because it's done to take the pulse of employees, and having studied opinion polls a few years ago, the important thing is that you ask the same questions each time so that you can actually detect the differences. That pulse survey is now turning out to be extremely valuable in giving us a sense of the direction we're moving in. Having said all of that, the feedback I'm looking for is from members and from employees, because they're the people that will tell you to face it's working or not. So Daryl, you're right, it's very difficult to measure. We'll do it in a relatively crude sense through the pulse survey, but the fact is, what I want both employees and members telling me that they have noticed an improvement, but it will take a long time and it'll be a slow old business and it will be relatively incremental. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, if I could just go back on that, Andrew, Peter's spot on. I mean, I know how hard this is. The pulse survey, it might be worth us having a look at that on this committee at some point in time, because I've not seen, I don't think I've seen a survey. So if we can have a little look at that, that'd be useful. Thanks.
I'm very happy to get Dave and myself to talk through that, because it's something I am particularly proud of, because it's a relatively simple way of evaluating a sensible cross-section of employees and the change they've got in their feelings. I don't know if, Chairman, through you, if you'd like to get David just to give you a 1-minute description of Pulse.
Yeah, so if we go to David, then I've got Rebecca and Susan, I think, also wanting to speak on this as well. So David, go for it.
Thank you, Chair. So specifically related to this item is the suggestion in the strategy that we use Hive, which is our employee engagement tool, to help to measure our progress against the EDI strategy. But obviously it can measure much more than that, as Councillor Turner and Councillor Wolf have mentioned. So happily work with you to bring something forward. We did a baseline survey back in February, so that was a whole organisation-wide, quite lengthy survey using Hive, and Hive is accessible to all employees either through the council issued equipment or on their own device. But obviously we're still sort of rolling this out and trying to get take up, and every time we do a piece of Hive or Pulse work, then the take up increases, so good progress there. So we can report to you on that baseline, but obviously last Feb was just in advance of COVID, so the kind of landscape shifted a bit. We haven't yet made a decision about when we run the second full survey to then compare to the baseline, but in the meantime the pulse surveys that Peter refers to have been a really helpful way in taking the sense of where the organisation was at any one time. So we've run 3 of those during the COVID period, and importantly measuring things like employee well-being and how they're feeling about their current circumstances, so we can then put in place a well-being offer, for example, to wrap around that. So that's essentially what we've used Hive and Pulse for to date, but happy, as I say, Chairman, to bring a fuller report back to you at some point in the future.
Yeah, I think that'd be useful. Thank you, David. Rebecca.
Yeah, thank you. Just to add to that, the other thing, because we asked ourselves exactly this question as we were going through the process, Councillor Turner, and the other thing we kind of realised we needed to do was go back to the voluntary and community organisations that we'd asked to answer some questions as part of the consultation that we undertook. So we asked them, I don't know, a handful of very kind of simple questions, one of which was, how well do you think the council currently responds to issues around equality, diversity and inclusion? And the last time, and when we asked them that, I think it was 29% said well or very well. So that's our baseline, 29%, and we'll go out next year and ask the same question, and that will give us some indication of how cultural change is being affected in terms of working with partnership, working with voluntary community organisations. The only other thing I did want to add is that some of the measures that we want to introduce, for example, we want to encourage employees to declare their personal data. At the moment, there's very low levels of people doing that, and that will also be a kind of indicative measure of how culturally the organisation is changing, the premise being that the more safe people feel, the more likely they are to reveal things like their sexuality, race, ethnicity and things like that. So there are other measures in there that will give us kind of proxy measures, if you like, for how culturally we're changing. Thank you, Chairman.
Susan, you've got a comment, haven't you? And then I'll go to Rebecca Knox, to Councillor Knox. Susan.
Okay, thank you. Just following on from Becky's comment as well, just internally as well, we're looking, as part of the work, we're starting to look at sort of our recruitment and retainment. So we'll start to look at sort of who applies and who is successful, but sort of at the end of that process when people leave, and starting to understand why people are leaving, and that information then also helps to build into that sort of employer of choice, but also sort of understanding if there are sort of equality and diversity issues that come up within that. And our participation in the Stonewall benchmarking scheme, the Workplace Equality Index, also asks us to do a yearly survey as part of that, which is very much about inclusivity and how do people feel sort of that they're made to feel welcome and supported and belong in work. Thank you.
Rebecca Knox. Rebecca, you're on mute. Rebecca, you there? It's typing away. Okay. Rebecca, I'm going to assume that we've lost you. I think one of the questions that I want to know, whilst we're employment, just looking at our workforce, does that reflect the population of Dorset? Oh no, it's me.
No, it's not you, Councillor Kirby. We can hear you. The answer is no, generally speaking. I think I'm right in saying no, but correct me, David, Susan.
No, I'd agree. Yeah, and our information around sort of sexual orientation and faith and belief is sort of very low. So we're not able to sort of compare that to sort of our Dorset residents, but then sort of we would struggle in something like sexual orientation with our Dorset residents, but to compare that to sort of national indicators as well. So we really
don't know.
No, we really need to do some of that work about sort of increasing sort of diversity data within our employees.
But I suppose the other question is, if we know that we're not hitting, if we know that it's not representative, I mean, like it's a kind of worm, but things like positive discrimination. I mean, is that a route that people would feel comfortable going down, or is that a no-go? I'll leave that for Peter to come in on. I'll ask him the awkward ones.
I think, thank you. I think part of the problem here is that people will not declare their sexuality and various other things, and they don't have to, quite rightly. So to be able to do analysis, to be able to compare it against a standard sort of standard model is quite difficult. I think we need to do more work on it. It's very difficult to know what we should do. And I'd be quite grateful if David McIntosh has got any suggestions. We try to be an equality employer, but it's very difficult, because to be truly so, you would have to have knowledge of everybody's, their individual characteristics, and we don't, quite rightly, because people are allowed to keep that to themselves. But could you ask David to comment?
David, do you want to come in quickly?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, any comparison at the moment, as other officers have said, is unreliable, really. But our sense is that our workforce doesn't represent or isn't representative of our wider community. So what do we want to do about that? We want to create an environment and be an employer where people want to come and work for us, because they want to engage in the type of things we do. They want to serve the public, and how best can we do that? Well, we could do it surely by making sure that we ourselves sort of reflect the wider community. So that's the ambition. Difficult to get there. We do have some kite mark type accreditations in EDI, which I think are helpful indicators to people outside the organisation that we take this seriously. And in Peter's forward in the strategy also acknowledges that when things happen in society more widely, like Black Lives Matter, we haven't to date been very, we haven't been on the front foot in terms of our organisational response to those, societal issues, societal change. And I know some of them are sensitive, and all members may not agree. But as an organisation, we ought to be clearer about what we think about those things. And I think that sends a really strong message to people who might be interested in coming to work for us, as well as those that already do, about the fact we take these things seriously. So no quick fix, but I think we could make a lot of progress on this quite quickly. Albeit it is a kind of for the longer term, but we, what else would we want to do, Chair, but be representative of our community in every sense?
Yeah, I agree. Tony Keynes, Councillor Keynes.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't put my video on. I've lost a crown on one of my front teeth. I wasn't going to speak on this, but one or two comments that have just been made have just sort of stirred me up a little bit, and that was about positive discrimination. I dislike negative discrimination, and I even more dislike positive discrimination, because if you're using positive discrimination by rights, you're actually also someone else is being negatively discriminated by your positive steps. So as much as I agree that everyone should have equal opportunity, everything should be done on merit. I don't want to be in a job because I'm a woman. I want to be in a job because I'm good enough. And I think all the characteristics that we're looking at, that has to be the fundamental. We want a good, strong, successful council, and we have to have the right people in the right jobs. I know it's a difficult balance, and I do appreciate all the sensitivities around this, but we have to look at the whole picture. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Tony. You raise an interesting point. I think just changing tack slightly. I mean, this is a very broad document, and it affects everything from our workforce all the way up to our communities. And one of the areas I'm quite intrigued about, and it's perhaps not reflected in in the documents are things like, so we have a large population of Nepalese as a result of the army camps, and I don't think that's reflected in the documents really, and how we engage with the MOD and those families that and our large sort of ethnic Nepalese populations. Susan, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. I suppose I have some contact with them through the garrison up in Blandford Forum. I met with them just before COVID, actually, sort of when we talked about how we can share information and sort of what goes on the site in terms of sort of the families that live there, as well as people who are in the actual forces themselves. We share information with them quite regularly, so they had an opportunity to respond to this strategy. I wouldn't say it's sort of they're a difficult group to engage in with. I think it's just people are getting on and going about their business up there and doing sort of their own thing. We have good contacts up there, and we have good contacts through our Armed Forces Covenant as well, in terms of some of the work that Kevin Moore does, who is sort of the Armed Forces coordinator within the council, in terms of generally within the Armed Forces as well. So messages and pieces of work that the council are doing do get shared within the forces.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think the armed forces are usually quite difficult to engage with, purely because many of them are here. They come from elsewhere. They could be here temporarily, and they tend to stay on the army camps. But yeah, actually, they are a group that that the partners of and the children use our schools, and I think that perhaps that's not completely reflected. But David McIntosh, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as Susan mentions, quite a bit of work goes on in terms of the Armed Forces Covenant. So the council is signed up to that, as did all the predecessor councils. We obviously have a significant military presence in our area, as well as veterans, ex-service personnel who might live here for whatever reason. So it's an important part of our community. Councillor David Walsh chairs the Armed Forces Covenant Board, which is an external board and involves, the CCG, for example, so that we can try to take into account, in terms of our policies and strategies, the needs of that particular part of community. I sponsor for SLT, the Armed Forces Covenant. There is a consultation underway at the moment to bring the Armed Forces Covenant into legislation and to make it a duty upon organisations to take those things into account. So that might well happen next year. The expectation is it will. But I think, Chairman, we can, in the meantime, very much strengthen the link between the EDI strategy and the Armed Forces Covenant work. So thanks for raising that point.
I think that would be useful. Rebecca Forrester, and then I've got Rebecca Knox's question that I'll read out. So Becky Forrester.
Thanks, Chairman. And just worth adding maybe that one of our, in addition to the protected characteristics that are enshrined in the legislation, Dorset has adopted some additional ones of its own. And I think I'm right, Susan, in saying that includes the armed forces and veterans and their families.
Yeah.
Thank you, but I completely agree. We could strengthen the link between those things in the document. So thank you.
Fab. So Councillor Knox has a question, and I'll read it out as her ICT is playing up. But so her question is, just assess the policy when we know that there is risk which could affect specific communities. Do we actively communicate with those communities, or do we wait? So during COVID, did we actively contact those in BAME, etc., and others in order to provide them a level of support if required due to that risk? Go on,
do you want me to shall I come in?
Yeah.
I suppose just to begin, I suppose internally, in terms of our BME employees, once it sort of became apparent from the evidence that came out of Public Health England that this group of people were at greater risk. Our risk assessments were adapted to pick up that, and individual risk assessments took place with employees to look at some of those issues and how we could mitigate against some of those risks. In terms of communities, we certainly got information out to communities and worked sort of strongly with Dorset Race Equality Council, who also did a report at the very beginning, sort of probably April, May time of COVID, about the impact on communities and sort of talking to communities. And we used that to help influence our equality impact assessment, looking at some of those vulnerable groups. There was an action within that impact assessment about sort of continuing to work with those vulnerable groups and using the evidence and sort of continuing evidence that comes out of Public Health England and elsewhere about sort of that group of people, but also sort of evidence is very much emerging now that people with disabilities are also at higher risk, and people with learning disabilities and are a further risk as well. And so we've built that in. We've got a sort of an officer action plan relating to sort of the impact assessment around vulnerable communities, and we update that, and there's a wellbeing group which is part of the community response group that is continuing to look at that and sort of how we respond.
Okay, so I've got a following question from Rebecca Knox. So next question, my next one is, I wonder if we have really got down to the basics. Do people know that they do not understand this issue? Language, even now I question at times. And also, how do we address predetermination again, non-awareness?
I think just in terms of something like language and people understanding information, I think one of our weaknesses from when we did that impact assessment and looking at COVID and the impact on vulnerable communities was how we responded to information in alternative formats. So sort of, for example, information being in other languages using British Sign Language. We were a little bit late off the mark in doing that. We have information on our website. And again, some of the actions in our action plan identified that we needed to do more about that. So we've some recent work that's been going on internally about is translation and interpreting. What services do we use, and do people know how to contact translation and interpreting services? So we're putting together some new guidance about that. And externally, we were really quite conscious people who may have a hearing or visual impairment, how their needs were responded to during COVID. So we've done a hearing and visual impairment survey where we had, I think it was about 228 responses. And we're just sort of doing the analysis of that at the moment, but looking at sort of where people got information from, and which was mostly for both people, mostly for people with visual impairments, was using national messages. So was using sort of information that was coming from the news or from central government. And I think that's something we're quite conscious at, is how local messages and national messages can differ sometimes, and that can lead to a bit of confusion for people, and can lead to sort of confusion around if you have maybe a learning disability or cognitive impairments as well, that we're basically getting two mixed messages. So Public Health have been looking at that through the Trusted Voices work as well, which is about how we get messages out locally for COVID. And we've continued to work with organisations such as Dorset Race Equality Council about that, and work then with some of our other groups.
Fabulous, thank you, Susan. One of the areas, and we touched on it earlier on another agenda item, is the clarity around written English, and we tend to go into local government speak, and that is really not inclusive at all. Particularly around consultations, and I think that's an area we really need to improve upon. So can we touch on sort of like things like how do we ensure that our English is clear, especially when it goes out to the public? Because I think it's really diversive.
We try to use sort of not that I can't remember the title of it now. We have, I don't want to say basic English, plain English. Plain English that we use, and sort of our consultation attempts to use that. There are obviously words that sort of we perhaps use as a council that sort of people probably don't have in their sort of vocabulary or sort of as part of their everyday language, that we do try to put sort of explanations in. We offer our consultations in alternative formats. So for the EDI strategy, we offered that in alternative formats, and we did some, we had a couple of telephone interviews, so went through the questions with people via the telephone. We can do large print, etc., and some information for the hearing and visual impairment survey we did recently went out through a talking newspaper as well. So there are other formats we can use. I think it's just about being conscious about that.
Is that reflected in the document though, in the equality policy?
About you in our strategy.
Yeah, in the strategy about the use of clear language. Because could that go in? Because that'd be really useful.
Yeah, no, I think that's a point worth picking up really, and I think it's probably, we have a style guide that we use internally, and I think some of that probably needs updating, just given just because language is constantly evolving, and some of the terms such as BAME is a term that's not really supported by people from sort of the Black, Asian, ethnic minority community. So there's things like that we need to start thinking about as well, really. And some terms around gender identity and sexual orientation are also changing as well. And so that there's, I think there's probably, our style guide is probably our best place for sort of putting updates to that in. And I know that does include plain English, but yeah, we can certainly include a reference in that to here.
I think I need that. Peter Barry, Councillor Barry.
Hello, thanks for that. Just a question about the plan. The first theme is understanding and working with our communities, and one of the key actions, it's actually at the bottom of the list, is to develop research base looking specifically at Weymouth and Portland. Obviously I'm aware of all sorts of the issues that Weymouth and Portland has. I was just wondering, in the context of what we're talking about today, what is it when you're looking to develop this research base in Weymouth and Portland? What is it you're actually looking at in the context of this subject?
Do you want me to have a go at answering that, Chairman?
Yeah, you go for it. Yeah, Becky.
I think I'm right in saying that was something that was added as a result of the consultation, because quite a few of the comments that we had were specifically around Weymouth and Portland, and that was through a number of different sort of issues. So housing in Weymouth and Portland, obviously kind of area of quite a lot of houses of multiple occupancy, and also in terms of socio-economic deprivation, which is again one of our Dorset protected characteristics. So absolutely right that we reflect it in the action plan. So that's where that came from.
Well, that's really good to hear, because obviously the area, as we all know, has got the lowest social mobility in the country.
Absolutely.
And yeah, so I'm pleased to hear that. It's really good.
Thank you.
Peter Wolf. Peter.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. But a problem with my buttons. On the subject of language, and it really is important, because it is quite easy to get the wrong end of the stick, not understand what's on offer. And I just wanted to try and find out from you and this committee whether you thought it might be worth asking Democratic Services to set up some seminars on it, or whether I could include it in the session that I run on HR policies or whatever. I mean, I agree with Darryl that overview committees need to review it, but the fact is you get, I've just looked at a press release over the weekend, which is just horrible technicalese, and we all, it's a bit like culture, we all need to concentrate on this all of the time. What have you any suggestions as to how we can address it? Seminar, a members seminar, whatever, please tell me.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd agree with the members' seminar. I think it's. I mean, for myself personally, I find it very difficult to keep up to date with using the correct language. But I think that going back to a point over that, the plain English, in terms of from a policy point of view, we are terrible as a council, and it's almost like we need to just think, everything that goes out to our residents just needs to be, perhaps once over to just think, is this clear English? Is there any local government speak? And if I was, I'm thinking about people that may not have English as their first language. Is it understandable? Would be my view, and I don't know if we've got any policies regarding that. But I'm going to go to Pete Barrow.
Struggling with the buttons here.
That's all right, we'll struggle. It's a Monday.
Just to come back on that question that's just been asked, it'd be very easy that we all get these press releases. So rather than worrying about them before they go out, if we see one that we could feel the need to comment on as far as language goes, if we just had a point of contact in the council, we could just forward it on and say, look, this has just gone out, and we'll make whatever observations we want to make. I know that's after the event, but it would help to change things over time, perhaps.
Okay. I'm going to go to Tony Alford, then I'll go to Peter. Peter, do you want to come back on that?
If I can just come on back, Pete, that's a great idea. You should always go back to comms, who are responsible in the overarching sense of the word, and you should always, in my opinion, you should go back to the cabinet member or whoever is quoted in that release and say, I mean, as long as we do this constructively, I'm looking for people to write to me and said, did you know that half of us don't know what some particular acronym is? And as long as we do it constructively, I think that could work. So tell the cabinet member, tell the person who's in the release, and tell comms, one or all of those. Thank you, Chair.
Tony Alford.
Thank you. It's really, firstly, an expression of appreciation for all of those involved in the preparation of this plan. And I think, on the whole, that we do these things well, but we have to constantly work hard at it, just to really keep up the pace. I have just one comment on the action plan, which is, we've talked about language and things like that. This action plan is a conventional local authority document and designed as such. If you think about the audience that we have for these issues, who are interested in what we're doing, is this a document that's going to be appealing to them? I suspect not.
Peter, I'll ask you to comment on that one.
I will, and I take Tony's point, and I'll go away and think about that, and I will talk to the officers about what we can do. We are constrained in many ways, and I would like Susan just to talk about the constraints of what we have to produce, and also just give us feedback as to how our partners, particularly Stonewall, DREC, and the various others, how they react to it. Do we have any evidence that they find it unhelpful or they'd like it to be changed? But whatever happens, I will take that away and I will think about it and I will talk to the officers. But if you could ask Susan just to comment on any feedback we've had from our partners, that would be helpful to this committee. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, Susan, would you like to come in?
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. During our consultation, we asked questions around both the strategy and the action plan. So sort of, were there areas of weakness, but also was there anything missing or not understood within both of them? And some of the feedback that we got about the action plan, that it wasn't smart, so it wasn't measurable, and it didn't have realistic targets. And we sort of, I suppose we're quite conscious of this, and something we want to try and do within this first year is have an action plan that people can input into. So rather than creating sort of a Word document, that it's a live document that sort of, as work takes place on some of the actions that are listed for that first year, that whoever in the council is doing some of that work on that, they can input into that. So we're sort of starting to have a discussion with colleagues in ICT about developing some sort of, I suppose, working document that would help us to pick that up. So I suppose at the moment it isn't friendly, or sort of some of the language in there, I suppose, when we talk about plain English isn't, and sort of perhaps isn't very clear, and perhaps the targets don't come out very clear. But I think as the sort of the year moves on, as we start to work on this, hopefully sort of come January, February, that we would be able to see some of the actual work taking place.
Fab. Excellent. Well, thank you, Susan. All right. Okay. So it's 10 to 12. So I'm going to take the recommendations now, as there's no further questions. Let me just scroll to the recommendations. So the recommendations are that Cabinet adopt the draft Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Strategy and the action plan attached to Appendix 1. Note the findings of the public consultation and note the timetable for decision making by Cabinet in January 2021. I think before we just propose and second that, I'd just like to say it's a really interesting document, and thank you, Becky, for doing it, and thank you, Susan, because there's obviously a lot of work that's gone into it, and I really like the action plan. I think it's got some really good controversial things in there, but the right things to do. So thank you very much. May I have a proposer for the recommendations, please?
So moved, Chairman.
Yeah, and a seconder.
Happy to second.
Yeah, there we go. And that's Pete Ballet. Okay, I'm assuming by the silence that there's no dissenters. So fabulous, and thank you, Peter Wolf. Thank you for joining us, Peter Wolf. All right. Okay. Let's.
Thank you for your time.
No, not at all. Not at all. Okay. So agenda item 6 is the committee and cabinet forward plan. So there's I've been in discussion with the cabinet members and the leader. I think what worked incredibly well was the workshop. So we had the housing workshop with relation to homelessness and rough sleeping. And I think it was able for us to be able to actually have that discussion and that deeper dive, I think works well. And I think something like this strategy here with the diversity and inclusion strategy works quite well, would work quite well as a workshop. So I'm really keen to have more workshops. So to that end, I'm going to suggest that we have potential 3 workshops. So one on the harbour, and I'm assuming Teresa, are you still in the meeting, or someone from Children's? Well, everything's coming, but the harbour project is.
Sorry, Councillor Kirby, beg your pardon.
Yeah, sorry, no, it's okay. It's my fault for just jumping on you. But would you like to just give a brief overview of the harbour and the work that we'll partake in?
Yes. Yeah, very happy to. Thank you. So colleagues will be aware that this is a proposal that's been around for a few months, and we're very pleased to have just secured planning application for the building in Dorchester Road in Weymouth to be both the harbour project and a small residential unit, a modular build in the grounds. The harbour project is based on very best evidence from the What Works scheme across the country. So the Department of Education puts together What Works from the best of the best, and we've been working very closely with North Yorkshire, an outstanding local authority. They have a scheme called No Wrong Door. Now they've protected the name of that, and that's absolutely fine. So we don't use the language of no wrong door anymore, so we talk about our scheme, which is the harbour. Fundamentally, it's a multi-agency team that work intensively with children on the edge of care or in care on the edge of breakdown, placement breakdown, to work to secure them staying with that family that they're with, whether it's their own birth family or their foster family or their residential provision. We've long way along the road so far in terms of some conversations with other partners, but more to do to finalise the approach and the policy, and to really implement this exciting way of working, which we're hoping to launch in the spring. And we thought it would be the most useful way really to kind of understand what is a complex service. It is a complex service. It will have police, health, and the local authority all working integrated single line management together to do a workshop. I think we were saying in January, Andrew, is that right? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, yeah. What I'm proposing is that we look at that in January, and then followed by transitions to be held in February. And I've just put the word out if Vivian's there, although I've just put Vivi. If Vivian's there, or someone from adults to just explain transitions, or saying that. Director Levy, are you happy to just explain transitions? And we'll look at that in February, to do a workshop in that in February.
Yeah, I can see Viv's there, but I think we're sort of we're looking to try and move away a little bit from the language of transitions, because although that is what it means to us, I was just fascinated by the conversation about language just going on around accessibility. And so Vivian and I talk about towards a settled adulthood, so that we work on the basis that that's what our outcome is. That's what we want for all of our young people, a settled adulthood. The needs around mental health transition, learning disability transition, children with complex needs transition is really important for us to get right. But really what families are interested in is having a settled adulthood for their young people.
And
yeah, do you know what? I agree.
Andrew, I'd just like to concur with that. I think it's about having an ability to support our young people to move when it's right for them and with their families. So that's really what we want to concentrate on, rather than that sort of that very cliff edge approach that's previously been around. This is about right time, right place, when people are steady and ready. So that's the conversation that we would like to have going forward.
Yeah, I agree, and I think also if we do name it settled towards settled adulthood, I think it makes it nice and broad, which I think is the way forwards, especially if we're going to do a workshop on it. And then the other item that we've got for a workshop is young carers, and again perhaps if we broaden that out as well into just carers, because I'm aware that all carers have had a bit of a rough time, and again there's no point siloing it. So I don't know if Vivian, you would agree with that, and Teresa, if you'd agree with that, or
yeah, I think that'd be really
absolutely. I think sorry, Teresa. Absolutely, I would agree with that, because I think there are some common themes for all carers, but also for specific groups there are areas that we'd like to explore. So I think, you know, having that more sort of open approach would be most helpful, you know, to have a real sort of look about how we support our really important residents who are caring in very complex situations.
Fabulous. Okay. I have a
Would we extend that to children who foster as well? Because again, some of those children have had a very interesting time when they've maybe had to shield because the children they're fostering are having to shield. It's really been an interesting challenge for them during this time, and so that would be really interesting us exploring that actually.
Yeah, are members happy with that? Those workshops as a suggestion? Yeah, I'm gonna take that as a yes because no one's saying no.
Yes.
Yeah, fabulous. Okay, I think it's the way forwards. We've got the results of the housing homelessness strategies come through to us as well over in January, and that should have been built upon. So fantastic. Okay, all right. If we're happy with that, I'll move forwards. There is Helen, are there any urgent items?
No, there are no urgent items, Chairman.
There is, however, an item, and this is probably the best time for me to say thank you very much to Helen for your service. As you are, I was going to say you're retiring. I don't ever like to say retiring because it doesn't seem like you are. You're old enough to retire. But you're due to finish Dorset Council, aren't you, in December? So thank you so much. You've done an amazing job, and thank you for keeping me on track because I know I'm a bit of a nightmare. So thank you. And am I right in thinking that it'll be Fiona King that will be not that you're replaceable, but your replacement will be Fiona King? Is that correct, Helen?
That's right. She's taking over from the 4th of January.
Okay. All right. Fabulous. Peter, would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you. Helen has clerked a whole variety of committees that I've either been chair or been on, And I'd just like to say from all of the other committees that she's done sterling work for, thank you, and we wish you well in your retirement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fabulous, Helen. Yeah, well-deserved rest, I can see that's been going on. Okay, so in terms of the next meeting, Helen, when is our next meeting?
I think it's in March. Something
Okay,
like the 4th of March.
That's fine, but we'll have the two workshops. So the next time I'll see you lot will be after Christmas at the workshop. So all that's left for me to say is have a lovely Christmas and keep safe. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, and Merry Christmas to you as well.
Thank you, Andrew.